Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you so much for joining. This afternoon, we're running a webinar for the next hour on what makes NHS strategy actually work. 10 years of successes and fails. Thank you for joining, and thank you for joining so promptly as well. Really, really appreciate it. So to introduce myself, I'm George Dellal. I'm part of Kaleidoscope Health and Care. Been with the organisation about 8 years. I lead both our consulting service line and also our strategy practice. So I've had the opportunity to work with some colleagues on the line already, and a range of organisations on a number of strategy different projects. If I can ask you, as you're coming in, so big welcome to people who are just joining. If you don't mind turning on your cameras, it'd be lovely to see some of your faces. And just to be conscious about the mute button as well. So we'll get started, and I imagine colleagues will be joining as we go forward. So a little bit about Kaleidoscope Health and Care. We're a not-for-profit social enterprise. We have a mission to help create a future for the sector that's kinder, more connected and joyful. We're employee owned, there are about 12 of us. We're based in Southeast London, but do work across the sector and across the country. We provide consultancy services around a range of different services around strategy development and organizational development and research and evaluation, helping a broad range of organizations. A little bit more about our services. So for collaborations and system support, a service line supporting organizations and ICBs with partnerships and collaborations. We do research and evaluation work, organizational development, service change, and crucially, strategy development, which is what we're here to talk about today. We have worked with a range of clients across the sector, and I'm delighted to have supported on a number of these. And we'll be hearing from a couple of former clients today at Oxleas and Royal Papworth Hospital. But this slide just shows a range of the breadth of clients across the NHS who we've had the opportunity to work with. So today's all about strategy. We have a set approach to strategy. We'll share a little bit more about that shortly, and with 6 principles around strategy. We've also developed a little guide to strategy. And if anyone wants a copy of that, really happy to pop one in the post. Just drop a message in the chat or send us an email afterwards. So how we're running today's session. So definitely want this to be a conversation rather than pure broadcast. We're going to be using Mentimeter today to get some of your views. So that's fairly straightforward platform that some of you might have used before. You're welcome to ask chat questions and comment as we go through. Let us know if there's anything we can do to help you. Raise your hand. You can use a caption function. We're going to be recording today's session today, so that we can share it and others can catch up. So just shout if you've got any issues with that. And I'm very relieved because delighted to be joined by Pete. Pete today is our tech lead, and any tech issues, he can be contacted at the hello email address you see there, or just via the chat function. At the end, we'll be giving you the opportunity to just fill out a little form to let us know how we did, and also you can request a copy of our strategy guide directly then. So 3 objectives today. 3 objectives for us today. Number 1, understand what makes strategy actually stick in organizations across the NHS. Have some honest conversations about what's difficult. Sometimes when you go to conferences or hear webinars, you often feel like there isn't a problem at all in the service, and everyone's just saying how great they are. So we're deliberately going to be provoking some honest conversations around what hasn't worked so well, what can we learn, and then help you figure out around what you might want to focus on next in your own strategy work. We'll start with just getting to know you and sharing back some of the data we received from the registration, and then I'm delighted to be joined by Rachel and Jag from Oxleas and Royal Papworth Hospital, respectively, and our very own Rich Taunt from Kaleidoscope, who'll be sharing a little bit of their views around strategy development, and then we'll move into a bit of a discussion around strategy and how we can make success the norm and not the exception. So as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be running this on Menti. There's a couple of ways you can join Menti. You can scan the QR code on your phone. You can go to www.menti.com and enter the code 89699278. Oh gosh, you're a speedy bunch today. We've already got 12 people who've managed to find their way in. It's fairly straightforward. You can flag to Pete if there's any issues at all accessing it. Yeah, I can see that numbers rising. The key with Menti is to keep my fingers crossed that no one gets too distracted by what's on their phone or the other 99 tabs they might have open, or maybe that's just me. But please do, yeah, I can see the numbers continuing to rise, and we'll leave it open just for a few more seconds to let people get on. Menti.com 89699278. So you've heard a little bit about me and a little bit about Kaleidoscope. Would love to hear where you are joining from today. Just get a sense of who's in the room. If you're not joining from the United Kingdom, please do just put your dot on the ocean that's closest to where you are. I'm currently in Southeast London. Definitely looking at people who've starting to join, a little bit of a cluster in the southeast, a little bit in the northwest, and some in kind of East Anglia, a little bit further west as well. Oh, it's beautiful data visualization, just seeing the dots increase in size. Brilliant, lovely if we had people from Scotland and Wales. But a lovely spread across England. So thank you for joining us from the kind of four corners of our nation. It's lovely to see a bit of geographic diversity here. So thank you. And I'm also relieved because Menti seems to be playing ball and working well as well. So we'll come back to Menti now with our next question, which is what three words best sum up how strategy is seen within your organization? This is completely anonymous. I have no idea. We have no idea who's typing in what. But I'd love to get a sense of thinking about your organizations. What three words best sum up how strategy is seen within your organization? So often we hear from a blend of skeptics to enthusiasts from organizations, and it'd be lovely to think about if you were to think about your own organization, your primary organization where you work, what three words sum up how strategy is seen? It's lovely to start to see some of these coming through. Disjointed, fragmented, disconnected. There's a little bit of a theme here around essential and necessary, reactive. Definitely some more skeptic comments around wasteful, porous, an afterthought, top down. It's a nice blend coming through. I'll let this run for just another moment or two. A desktop exercise, that's really interesting. One of our principles around strategy development is that strategies should be owned by those who do the work. So definitely not something that's developed in a dark room on a desktop. So just seeing some of those bigger letters, disconnected, reactive, essential, necessary, ambitious. So nice to see ambitious there as well, and collaborative as well. Thank you. So the mood in the room. So you might remember when you registered, we asked you for a couple of questions. just to get the thoughts of people who registered. So I'll just play some of those back to you now. So we asked, to what extent do you agree? NHS strategies promise more than they deliver. 97% agree. So that kind of chimes back with that ambitious comment that we heard earlier. So 97% of you agree NHS strategies promise more than they deliver. Changing context makes it impossible for an individual organisation to set effective strategy. I was really pleasantly surprised when we saw this, when we did the numbers. 76% disagree with this. So that means that 76% of respondents think that it's still possible, despite the changing context. We know one of the few things that's constant is change within the NHS, but despite that changing context, it's still possible for individual organizations to set effective strategy. So it's really nice to see that. And I'm confident my organization is more effective because of its current strategy. This was also really positive. 61% agree. So 61% of registrants feel that their organization is more effective because of its current strategy. Yes, it's some food for thought as we enter this session. So what did we want to know? Asked you what questions do you have, and some of this will be covered off by our speakers in just a moment. But we asked, well, what do they most want to get out of the session? So how to make cultural change stick came up. Getting senior leadership buy-in to strategies. How to make sure it's useful to everyone in some of our work. A lot of the questions we get, one of the markers of success we use is how do we make sure that everyone can connect their role to the strategy? How to measure if it's actually working. Did it make a difference? Is our organization more effective as a result? How to overcome immediate operational demands. So one of the key things we hear and what we coach leaders on is how do you get the balance right between being strategic, thinking ahead, and setting and keeping up with operational pressures at the same time. How to keep momentum alive through implementation. How to assure delivery without killing the energy. And then a lovely question around how to keep it simple but impactful, and recognizing the context that you're working in often is quite complicated and changing, and how do you keep a strategy that's simple and impactful. So we'll get into some of this with our speakers in just a moment, but thank you. A really lovely range of questions. So without further ado, I'll ask our first speaker, Rachel from Oxleas, to introduce herself and share a little bit about her thoughts on what makes strategy effective and what makes it stick and what she's learned. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks very much. It's really lovely, as always, to be with the Kaleidoscope community. Always such like an energetic, positive and thought-provoking group. So I'm Rachel. I'm Chief Strategy Officer and Chief People Officer at Oxleas. And I've been involved I'm just coming up to the kind of third round of strategies that I've been involved with at Oxleas. And at the very beginning, we worked really closely with Kaleidoscope, and it really helped to kind of freshen our sense of ambition and what we could achieve. So I'm going to talk about what I've learned about what makes strategy actually work, and I'm going to approach it from quite a human perspective. So if we start with a question about how many of us have made a New Year's resolution, I'm pretty sure that probably most of us have. And how many of us have quietly abandoned it by about the third week in January? Again, probably most of us. And the thing I want us to reflect on is that we don't usually fail because we don't know what to do. We know the basics. We know we need to eat the kale, drink the water, do the steps, take up reformer Pilates, spend less time doom scrolling. The knowledge is not the problem. The hard bit is turning good intentions into day-to-day practice. And I think the challenge is exactly the same with strategy. Strategies don't fail, in my opinion, because people don't understand them or because they're not clever enough. They fail because changing behaviours and approaches is really hard, because organisations are just big groups of people, all with their own habits, pressures, loyalties, doubts, routines, working relationships, exploding inboxes, and a really never-ending to-do list. So what is it that helps people and organisations to really change? I'm going to draw on my own experience, but I also think that it's supported by the evidence, which is that you need to break things down. You need to make progress visible. You need to celebrate the small wins, keep hold of that bigger vision, the thing that you're striving towards. But one thing that I think is really important, I don't think we spend enough time reflecting on, is that we need to make sure that the change fits with how we see ourselves, our identity. And I was talking about this with my husband this morning, who was bemoaning the fact that he's put on weight after a whole weekend of drinking around the World Cup, after having done quite a lot of thinking around losing weight before that. So we'd gone for a walk this morning with the dog. And I was thinking about the fact that, you know, if I join a gym because I'm full of January enthusiasm, it's probably going to fade by February, if not long before that. But if I start to change my mindset and think I'm someone who really looks after my health, and I start to build my routines around that changed mindset, then that change is much more likely to last. And I was trying to say to him, you know, do you see yourself as someone who likes to party hard and who has to impose controls on himself, or do you see yourself as someone who has a lot of respect for kind of how you live your life and the habits that you have? And we started to kind of explore what the struggle might be for him to make the changes that he wants to take. So if you think about partnership working, you know, we might decide in our organisation that partnership working is really key to our success as an organisation. We can write in our strategy that we want to work more collaboratively with partners to deliver better care to local communities. That's very lovely, it's very worthy, it's a very 10-year plan. But if that's what it is, it's not going to change much. Even if we launch lots of partnership working projects, it won't really work until we start seeing ourselves as partners. So we really need to weave partnership into our identity. We have to help people notice when partnership working is going well, the partnership working they're already doing, the difference it makes, celebrating it as part of the very lifeblood of the organisation. And in my mind, that's when the strategy kind of moves off the page and into the organisation, is when you make it part of your identity. So the first bit is about identity. The second bit is about removing friction. So on a personal level, that might mean packing your gym bag the night before so that you haven't got an excuse not to go to the gym, or putting your trainers by the door, or hiding your biscuits, but I'm not going to ever try that. That's just a step too far. In strategy, it means removing the things that make delivery harder than it needs to be. So in Oxleas, one of the ways we've done that is through what we call our squad goals, which I know is slightly naff. I think it's a bit of a Taylor Swift reference, but it stands for strategy, quality and directorate goals. And the idea is that we get dispense with all of the action plans that each directorate had. They used to have ones for strategy, for quality, for finance, for qualities, for delivery. And we just bring them into one clear set of combined goals. So teams can see the whole picture. They don't get distracted by the multitude of action plans, and they can see how it all works. So strategy becomes right in the middle of day-to-day work. It's the structure around which our governance, our reporting, our successes all work. So everything fits around that structure. And that's helped us to see some really good results. Third thing I want to talk about, and I think I've just got a minute to go, I'll be super quick, is about resistance. People don't resist change just because they're difficult people. Well, not usually anyway. They resist change because change is emotional. It affects our identity, our relationships, and our sense of security. So when we're launching a strategy, I think we need to ask ourselves, can our people see themselves in the future that we're trying to create? Do they trust the direction? Do they feel that it reflects the real life of the organisation, not just a kind of beautifully written boardroom ambition? And are they willing to be vulnerable? Because change makes us vulnerable to make the changes that we need. And if we aren't sure about the answer to those questions, I think that means we have not spent enough time focusing on engagement. And I think engagement is key to all of this, not as a tick box, not even just to get the strategy right and make sure that it's deliverable, but to make sure that it's something that the people in your organisation actually want to deliver. Because if they don't want to deliver it, they're not going to. So in Oxleas, we have 3-year strategies. I can't cope with 5-year ones. The NHS changes far too much in that time for anything kind of longer to feel real. But we spend a whole year of that 3 years engaging on the next version, because that conversation is as important as the conclusion. It's probably more important. Finally, we celebrate progress in the same way as celebrating 30 days not smoking or running a 10K. We need to shine a light on the small wins. So we have spotlight sessions to show what's moving in the right direction. And we particularly focus on the stuff that's creative, a bit different, a bit innovative, the work that gives people energy. So I think strategies succeed for the same reason that people succeed in changing their behaviours, not because the goal is beautiful or clever, but because we create the conditions that make it feel personal to people, that it make it feel possible, and most of all, that makes it feel worth it. And that's when the strategy stops being a document and becomes the way that we do things. Looking forward to the discussion. Thanks very much.
That was great. That was really spot on, Rachel. Really helpful and thought-provoking. I'm feeling inspired now to change lots about myself in a personal way, and then also just buzzing with questions and thoughts. I love what you were saying around changing the narrative and the identity. I did some work with chronic disease communities in America, and we talked a lot about changing the narrative from "I'm sick and broken, come help me" to "me and my peers are doing what it takes to look after ourselves in spite of the hurdles we face." Really powerful stuff, and looking forward to discussing further. Thank you. I'll hand over to Jag now, just to hear a little bit about your experiences, Jag, and to follow on from what Rachel said.
Thanks, George, very much, and thanks to Rich and to George for this opportunity to meet some more Kaleidoscope colleagues. And just without wanting to cause embarrassment to Rich and George, it's been an absolute pleasure working with Kaleidoscope, actually. I wouldn't have said yes otherwise, to be honest with you. I turned down a lot of stuff, so genuinely wanted to be here and say hello. So I was asked to talk a bit about what differences does it really take to make strategy work, and then secondly, what does it feel like to be how does strategy feel in the NHS right now as a leader in a constrained environment? So I'm chair of Royal Papworth Hospital. My background is a consultant in newborn intensive care for many years. So I find myself chair of an adult cardiothoracic hospital, having never looked after adult patients for about 30 years. It puts me in a very nice position of being able to ask lots of questions, and I think that's important. So mine is probably not as eloquently constructed as Rachel's, but I'll try to give you a feel of what I think it's about. So I think there are four categories in my head for the first part. What differences do you need to make sure that we have to make strategy work? I think as much of this is about the act of producing the strategy and the process of it and who takes part, as it is about whatever document or medium you end up with at the end of it. So it's the active process of engagement and with whom and by whom. The second bit is then the content, but the content needs to be dynamic and not live in the boardroom. It needs to be out there. It needs to actually be relevant to the day-to-day work of the organisation of the people. The third, I think, is commitment, and meaningful commitment, an active commitment that's recommitted on a regular basis that we are going to deliver this. We're not letting go of this. And framing it, I think, as Rachel has also touched upon, this isn't a discretionary activity you do on a Friday afternoon when you've got 5 minutes spare. This is actually the bread and butter of what the organisation's about. So it shouldn't be, I'll do this when I get a chance. This is what we do every day, and it should inform the choices we make, the trade-offs we make, the stuff we prioritise, the stuff that we don't prioritise. So it becomes a living will rather than something that you do when you have time. And then I think the last bit is that you have to keep on honouring this commitment. So it's a bit like Rachel's husband's waste challenge, I suppose, but you've got to keep on committing to doing this and remind yourselves and each other that you've committed to doing this. And actually, in involving lots of people, as we've done at Papworth, I think Rich and colleagues, we had 1,400 conversations, I think, with people developing strategy. We went out to about 30 other organisations. It makes it easier for us to hold each other to account, saying, hang on a minute, that's not what we agreed. I think this self-policing is really important to keep the momentum. So those are the four bits on what I think to make it work, but I just want to turn that into a few words in terms of how I felt the strategy process felt like. It really is engaged around clarity of purpose. And for me, the visceral engagement is important because we had an earlier presentation on how we might do strategy, and I felt completely untouched by it, to be honest with you. It was just not, it created no visceral response to me at all, no emotional connection. I think that's really important. It's got to be accessible, not abstract. It's got to be practical and tangible. I've got to be able to hold what it might deliver in my hands, I think. As Rachel said, it's got to connect people, it's got to engage people. We listened widely, and we got a whole bunch of our staff to be the active ambassadors for it. It was, the responsibility sits with the board, but the board doesn't deliver it or develop it. I mean, it's got to get away from that, I think. Interesting, George, on your graph, I think I worked for Macmillan Cancer Support for about 9 years. I worked for Cambridge University Hospitals. So a number of people I worked with, and we've all done strategy differently in these environments. So there's lots we can learn from each other. The bit I put down laterally as I was thinking about it this morning is the process of developing strategy has to create the mood, the right mood for people to want to take part in this. And I think we did that. Kaleidoscope did that, the staff at Papworth did that. It was relevant, it was actually enjoyable. You wouldn't ordinarily associate the word enjoyable with strategy, I'd have to say, but actually it was enjoyable. Now, some of that might be to do with the vast amounts of cake that was produced at every team gathering and so forth, but it was genuinely enjoyable. And I think the staff who took part enjoyed the conversations. But it was also very honest, and we had some explicit conversations about what are the trade-offs. So I think I said to Rich way before we started, if this doesn't tell me what we can deprioritize, this isn't going to be enough. And so we had trade-off conversations. We can't do it all. That just becomes a shopping list. And so we were able to have some trade-off conversations. It allowed staff also and colleagues to express, well, what are we really about? What does this hospital stand for? What are we trying to be? And there was a dichotomy between, we're a local DGH, or are we a tertiary hospital for cardiothoracics? Are we an international hospital for cardiothoracics? What's our identity? What do we stand for? And that was helpful. It's got to be followed up by meaningful commitment, as I've said before. That's also got to mean the board has got to be held to account, not just by itself, but by staff. So I'm quite happy for the board to be held to account, saying, well, you promised we would do this and we would commit to this, and then we have to deliver on that. So that's kind of where I think it's got to, the sort of stuff that makes it work. It can't be a dusty document which sits somewhere, which is how I think, if I'm being totally honest with you, I suspect some of our staff still might think that as well, and that's inevitable. Strategies come and go, as do chairs and chief execs and boards. The people that stay behind are usually the consultant staff and some of our nursing staff and some of our other professional staff. Others turn over quickly, and so trying to engage the people that are cynical, not because they're difficult people, but because they've seen it develop before and not deliver. That's an important challenge for us, I think. And that leads to the second part of what I was asked to talk about, which was, how does it feel like, how does strategy feel right now in the NHS in a constrained environment? Well, I think ordinarily, and there remains a risk that it could feel like a discretionary activity, as I've said. It's something that we need to do, but we're firefighting every day with the demands of the centre to do performance, to produce financial stability, increase productivity. But that I think will be a category error, because that stuff, productivity, financial sustainability, quality of care, that is what the strategy is about. It is our day-to-day stuff. So we shouldn't think of it separately. It is what we do. Strategy allows us to think about how do we deliver the stuff we want to deliver better? How do we focus on stuff that matters? And how do we pay less attention to stuff that doesn't matter? So I think it's an opportunity. It might feel countercyclical to be investing in strategy right now, but this is exactly the right time to be thinking about strategy. It's what the investors, I think, would say, you know, you invest at the sound of cannons and you run at the sound of trumpets. You should be counter-cyclical about this, because here's an opportunity to do things better when everything around us is being constrained. And I think if it does nothing else from the board's perspective, if the board is energized to create the right environment for our colleagues and staff to thrive, it will have done the right thing. Because we're not delivering the strategy, we're not delivering the care. My responsibility is to create the environment where our bright people can thrive and flourish and deliver great care. And I think that's what it's helped us to do. So I think that's what it feels like at the moment. But I'm also pretty phlegmatic about it. It requires us to be single-minded about it, to remain focused on the strategy, to keep the day-to-day noise that distracts us in context as well. We've still got to deliver that, but we've got to be confident that our strategy is going to help us deliver it better as time goes by, and try to keep some of the competing priorities off our staff's back. So I'll stop there. but strategy is a default way of working, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jag. And yeah, I loved a lot of what you said resonates with our work. And thank you for the kind words at the beginning. I think your points around being honest and forcing people to make choices is really important and can actually be quite liberating. And I think also when it's done well and it feels genuine, there's also the lovely point around joy and helping staff reconnect to why they joined the organisation, the mission, and the broader NHS, and that can be really powerful and actually quite beautiful and humbling to see as well. I'll hand over to my colleague Rich now, just to share a little bit about what we've learned over the years, helping organisations develop strategies. Rich, I'll share the slides as well.
George, thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to see some familiar faces popping up in the participants list and on camera, so that's very lovely. Yes, as George says, we've been going as Kaleidoscope now for a decade. So I've been at Kaleidoscope for all of that time, and actually will be leaving in just a few days' time. So it's a bit of a retrospective today, which is lovely. And I wanted to start by just coming back to this great word cloud from earlier on, because I think it encapsulates a lot of what we see when we are helping people with strategy, which already started to come out with Rachel and Jag's talks, which is this love-hate relationship we have with strategy, that we both think of it as disconnected and reactive, but it's essential and it's necessary. And it's sort of this we're drawn to it because we think it's really important, but then it's a bit rubbish. And so it's this tension we see as to, it can be a good thing, but too often it's not. It can help you prioritize, but too often we're over-promising and under-delivering. So this whole concept about how do you do strategy really well, how do you unlock the potential of strategy, has been core to what we've been doing at Kaleidoscope for 10 years now. We're going to be going on doing it, hopefully for the next 10 after that, I'm sure. But I wanted just to share 5 particular lessons which we have learned along the way, which isn't all to do with our successes, some to do with where we're still failing. So we're going to talk a bit through that. So George, yep, we can have the slides back up. That's great. So 5 lessons, we'll talk through these. So number 1, set on the corridor tends to stay there unless you stop it. Yes, you can have another priority, but let's talk about the cost. We're going to go existential for number 3. If a strategy falls in the middle of the night but no one hears it, does it? Anyway, I think you get the point of that. What the purpose of actually writing this whole thing is and what you do next. We'll go through these, and I think we're going to open up. George, thank you very much indeed. So we've already started to talk about the role of a good strategy being, or the value of a good strategy, a lot coming through the engagement you have. What we see again and again and again is often the discussion going on in the boardroom is a very different discussion to what's going on in the corridors. And if you just stick with having the boardroom version of the conversation, you don't get very far. So one of the questions we ask quite early on when we're working with organisations is just to say, oh, what do we need to know, but we're not going to find written down anywhere. And everyone go, right, okay, how long have you got? And this happens everywhere, and I'm sure this resonates with people. So getting this corridor version of what's going on, absolutely essential. One of the main techniques which we've used over the years is, Jag referred to it, about using representative groups of staff to front up, to lead large chunks of the whole strategy process so that they are having conversations with their peers. It's not some fancy management consultants coming in and leading that conversation, but it's actually a peer-to-peer conversation. What we have seen coming from this again and again is how much better those conversations are. How much better the chat, the insight is when you have those staff-to-staff conversations rather than sort of a remote body, whether it's the strategy teams or consultancy-led. So how do you make this conversation between peers rather than just between sort of a foreign group and staff? So Number 2, we can come back to all of these in discussion. Thank you, George. Fascinating, just in that question we asked you about, do NHS strategies promise more than they can deliver. A shout out to the 3% which said no. If you'd like to tell us which organisations you work for, we'd love to come and study you, because the thing we see all the time is people know that they should have focus. We want focus. We want to know what we should stop doing. But when push comes to shove, it's really difficult and people tend to back off. So this point on the slide about people saying, yeah, look, our superpower is saying yes. And it's killing us. People see the real difficulty in signing up to everything, but find it really hard to say no. And I'd just hold our hands up and say, we do a couple of things at Kaleidoscope, which I think does help this. But more often than not, when it really comes down to it, it's a really hard place to be in for us or for others to be saying, no, we're not, you can't sign up to that additional thing because actually it's going to have an effect. It's going to dilute everything else you're doing. We see people say all of the time, we want to be brave, we want to be decisive, but we don't want to upset anyone. You can't do that. And so in a way, if you don't understand that at some level, you will be creating winners and you will be creating losers, you haven't really got to the bottom of strategy being about choices. And almost I sort of want to rebel and go, no, I'm sure you can do it without upsetting anyone. You can't. If you're running a big complex organization, if you're making choices, they're going to be things which you're prioritizing and deprioritizing, and that will play out in appropriate ways, or in understandable ways. George, number 3, please. So our philosophical. Does your strategy exist at 3 a.m? Yes, Rachel's already said that if you look at the evidence behind why major change fails, staff resistance, top of that list. And yes, it's possible to think about that in terms of all of these malicious staff who don't want the strategy to happen. It's not that. We know it's not that. Often it's because the strategy it's not known, it's not connected, it's not relevant to people where their operational reality is very different. So if you think about if you're working in an organisation which has a night shift, if you're joining from an ICB, we presume you probably don't, but you still might. But if you're working with an organisation with a night shift, how do you make a strategy live at 3 a.m? How do you make it relevant to people who are working in a world where it's not close to that boardroom discussion? And again, we still really wrestle with this. Again, the process of actually making sure that all staff, all stakeholders, beyond going into patients and communities, are involved and feel ownership of the process and the outcome has to be the start. But we'll come on to how do you keep this going in just a moment. George, thank you. Documents. Yes, we could fill a whole webinar just talking about strategy documents. It's not really the point. It is a document is important, but really what you're doing is you're creating a signpost. You're not creating a sacred text. So typically they're skimmed, they're filed, and that's probably okay. But what really matters is that 1, yes, you've got a record for you. What did we actually say? But 2, you're then sort of making sure that all of the substance, all of the tone, all of the direction you're wanting to set gets into the lifeblood of the organization. And you don't do that through pointing people to a 40-page PDF on your website. And so the interesting thing is how do you make the conversation live? How do you make this into part and parcel of just what's going on in the organization? And as we come on to number 5, George, please. Thank you. That you're not just thinking about that as a 2-week burst around your launch. And it's sort of, if you're going to prioritize your strategy when you launch it, you probably are going to do that. You can sort of think, yes, great, we're winning here. We have got our strategy out and we're talking about it. But when you get to month 4, when some of that first flourish has gone out a bit, when it's already feeling a bit old, how do you make it still be the main thing you want people to be talking about, reflecting on, bringing their decisions back to? And so there are things around strategy. Strategy, let's be real, some of it does sound quite cool. Strategy. But a lot of successful strategy is about the boring, relentless discipline and focus about continuing to talk about it, continuing to focus on it long after the launch. And I'm Rachel, I love we do 3-year strategies, 1 year doing the engagement. So a third of your time is always talking about strategy. That to me sounds about right. I'm sure others will be going, oh, that seems quite a lot. But actually, how you keep this live and relevant and in the lifeblood is something which is far more for life than just for a sort of a sudden burst. And it also means that you've got to get the ownership up and out beyond just those with strategy in their job title. Again, apologies to all those joining with strategy in their job title, and make it feel owned by the whole organisation. That really applies at board and exec level, but it applies throughout as well. Okay, there's 5 lessons for now, and I'm going to pass back to George.
Thank you very much, Rich. Yeah, a lot of what you said obviously resonates with my experience, having lived through some of these lessons with you. I'll just pick up on your point about discipline of prioritizing and saying no. In 2018, I was fortunate enough to attend NHS Providers Conference, and got to hear from the ill-fated Matt Hancock, who set out 3 priorities. And when he was grilled to give some other priorities, he kept getting questioned, well, what else should we do? It was very easy for him to have listed off a host of other things he wanted to accomplish. But I actually have quite a lot of respect for him, because he said, no, with priorities, I'm only giving 3. Because if I start to dilute it, everything becomes a priority and then nothing's a priority. And being really focused and maintaining that discipline when it's so easy and so tempting to say yes to other things is definitely something that that I took away from that talk, and we've seen in our work since. So a big thank you and kind of virtual round of applause to all our panelists. Really appreciate you sharing so generously your wisdom. I think at this point it'd be really lovely to get a sense from the room, to get a sense from people here today. Those 5 lessons that Rich talked us through. I think on Menti, you should be able to rank them from most to least important. So we'll give you a moment or two to do that. And while you're filling that in, I might just go whip round to our panelists to get a sense from you, which do you feel is your most important? And Rich, I'm going to ask you to make choices in real time. So of your 5, you now need to walk the walk. Which of these do you feel is most important from your experience? Then we'll come round to Jag and Rachel.
So I'm going to go strategy never stops, because I think it is a lot about how you think about your role, the role of strategy in your organisation. If you think of it as a thing you do sporadically and then it's done, you're lost. So unless you start to really change how you think about strategy, what it is, and how it plays a function in your organisation, the rest are nice, but you're in trouble.
I wonder, I hope you haven't unduly influenced the voting. I see it's always tempting to go into
just lobbying for our top ones.
Jag, I'll give you the opportunity to make the case for 1 or 2 of these. Oh, and you might still be muted, Jag.
I haven't been led by Rich. In fact, I've changed Rich's slide on strategy never stops to pick up the 3 AM bit, and have in my head now I've reframed that as strategy never sleeps, which is more relevant to the 3 AM as well. So I think that is the most important one, because it's in my head, it's a test of, is it alive, is it relevant, is it in the day-to-day, or is it a 9-to-5 board conversation or a strategy director conversation? So that's the one I would go for.
Yeah, thank you, Jag. There's a lovely quote from the eminent Mike Tyson. It says, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. And I think the reality of 3 AM, there's a shift, there's a crisis. Can you look to your strategy for guidance and for the principles within it? Rachel, what about you?
I'd love to be different and choose another one, but that wouldn't feel quite right. So I mean, I think I would just evolve the first one about strategy never stops, because that point about 4 months is right, but 2 years, I think that's the point at which so much can have changed externally in the organisation that people feel. If I think about the fact that we launched our strategy in September 2024. And since then, we've had the 10-year plan, we've had the NOF framework, we've had neighbourhoods being a kind of a new concept, we've had dramatic change to the finances. The real struggle is keeping everybody focused and understanding and sense making how all of that fits together. So the question I asked myself is, if I won the lottery and was off doing something very exciting instead, would the strategy still be taking hold in the organisation without me and my team still pushing it forward? Is it sufficiently, does it have the momentum, and is it already kind of embedded in it that it has a life of its own, and we're there to tend and tweak and help rather than to be the energy that drives it? So I think that strategy never stops one is my favourite too.
Brilliant, and it's lovely to get some agreement. But feel free to disagree with each other as we open it on. I do always think a panel has healthy amount of tension within it. Yeah, just looking through the strategy never stops at the top. The point about prioritization coming in second. That point about the corridor, the conversation staying in the corridor unless you stop it in at third. Rich and I have a fab colleague called Shane Carmichael, talks a lot about lowering the waterline to see what's below the surface, and it being kind of Aldi shopping trolleys or line bikes or whatever it is, but you won't know until you start to water that line, lower that line, and let people surface what's really going on. That point about strategy existing at 3 a.m. We already touched on, and then making sure you're writing the document for you. And I think that's a really important point. I mean, broadly speaking, we see there being as two main models of consultancy. One where you hire consultants to go off into a darkened room, research the world around them, and come up with a strategy and say, ta-da! And then there's another model which involves listening to the staff, to the community, to the leaders, to everyone who's involved in the organisation, and seeing where they feel the energy is and where they report wanting to go. I'll move us on. So it'd be lovely to hear from you all around what lessons have you learned about how to do strategy well. And I'll give people a few seconds to do that. And I think, Rachel and Jag, I know you've touched on some of this already, but maybe if you had to give like maybe 1 or 2 sentences on a lesson that you've learned, it would be lovely to hear maybe a story or an example around maybe something that didn't go well, or just a lesson that you've learned in your experience. Maybe we'll go to Rachel first this time, and then Jag.
Okay, a lesson that I've learned. I think I've learned that I personally have to resist bringing all the energy, because if I bring all the energy, then there's not as much space for other people, and particularly in my executive team. So I've been quite consciously, with this evolution of the strategy, thinking about all the different ways that people right across the organisation can play their part in bringing the momentum, and it feels much more of a co-owned product as a result of it, and that's changed year on year. I've also learned to try and make all of the endless change in the NHS work for us. So every time there is a new change now, we use it as an opportunity to explain how it fits with our strategic direction. That helps us to sense make all the change for the organisation, but it also helps to reinforce this is our strategic direction, this is why we're going in this direction, and this is why this opportunity to become an Advanced Foundation Trust, or this way of working with another organisation, helps us to achieve what we are here to achieve and what you've all told us you want to achieve. So trying to make that endless shifting sands, make a virtue of it rather than a problem, so that each time something shifts, we use it as an opportunity to try and bed that and dock that into our strategy and our direction of travel.
Thank you, Rachel. Jag, let's come to you, and then we'll hear from Rich.
I think it's covered in one of the points, actually. I made it earlier, but it's the engagement, it's the process that one deploys to help develop the strategy, which I think is, to me, is so critical, that because that's the bit that creates I think I might have said it to Rich before, but we're halfway home if we've got people engaged and they're talking about it and they're helping to develop the strategy. The delivery has already started even before the official launch of the document. So that bit, to me, I think is such a key lesson. And linked to that is, it reflects a little bit of what Rachel said, but I think boards and senior leaders in particular have to let go a little bit and trust the process. and really rely upon the process to deliver what is needed. Sorry to echo my Arsenal supporting manager Mikel Arteta's slogan, which is trust the process. I think one has to trust the process and deal with the ups and downs of the process, I think. So if there's some challenges that come out of it or some difficult questions, then we deal with it. But I don't think we should go back to taking control of the process away from the people that need to own it and deliver the strategy over the coming years. So that would be the key lesson, I think. And the other close shave lesson I think I had wasn't that close to shave really in the end, because it was not going to work well, but just to make sure that you give strategy the time to breathe and develop, and not give it an artificial deadline. It's going to be delivered by this because we want to submit it by then, and so forth. I mean, it can't be endless, but it's the quality of what we do is much more important than some artificial deadline here.
Thank you, Jag. Yeah, that point about trusting the process and trusting people, really important. I have a colleague of mine who talks about letting go of the balloon and just having the confidence to do that and to see where it goes. Lovely to see these comments coming through. We'll do a write-up of this session and send it around. There's a lot of wisdom here, and I'll try and scroll up and cover these off in just a moment. But first, let's hear from Rich. One lesson, Rich.
George, thank you. And I think we should congratulate ourselves that we managed to get 50 minutes through this session without any sort of football reference until Arteta decides to raise his head. So well done, Jag. So one lesson we've definitely learned as Kaleidoscope, which I think is relevant to people joining, is when we started out, we'd quite often be commissioned as Kaleidoscope by a strategy team, and we'd work for the strategy team, and we may see the board, we may not, and we realised that this didn't work. And if we're working for an organisation now, we will insist, in a kind, connected, joyful way, that actually our work includes working directly with the board from the very start. Because particularly if you're talking about the sort of processes we discussed today, which are high on engagement, high on letting go of the balloon, the board need to be involved in that conversation from the very start. And they need to be signed up to what's going to be going on, because if not, it's going to get to the end and they're probably going to say, I wasn't sure about that from the start, and go in a different direction. So I think there's something really important here about involving you, the ultimate decision makers in an organisation, about the type of process you're going to run at the very outset. Don't leave it till later. Don't try and slip it through. They won't even notice. But how you involve them in that from the very start.
That's great. And I've noticed there's some lovely themes coming through here around co-production, culture, the importance of the process, the importance of hearing from communities and the staff, the importance of listening, giving people permission for honesty, psychological safety. There's also a nice theme around kind of less being more, and sometimes strategies kind of overpromise. Lovely point about kind of asking the right questions. Rich, I'll just pick up on that last point you made, because someone snuck in a question here, which I think relates, which is, it's kind of to Jag's point as well around the kind of carousel of execs versus other staff. But someone's asked, given they're here today and gone tomorrow, should the execs be allowed to determine the strategy, or should they be required to implement what the staff and patients determine is best? And I'll be interested in panelists' views. I think one of the challenges, or what makes listening to people different, is they're not going to all say the same thing. And so when people don't align, and you've got different groups potentially wanting different things, how do you kind of reconcile that? So interested in reflections, and maybe we'll just do a little bit of a whip round of the panelists. Rich, I'll start with you, and then go to Jag and Rachel on that point.
I quite like the idea of a new law which forces execs in the NHS to go on what they're told. So yes, one, not everyone's going to say the same thing. You need to have someone who is going to be there to make the trade-offs. How you involve other people as well as execs and non-execs in that process, absolutely. But you've got to be able to think about how those different processes run through. I think a lot of that is going back to being really clear on purpose. And so one of the themes, and Jag may want to touch on it, when we were working with good colleagues at Papworth, is lots of people said, public health is really important. The organisation said, yes, it is really important, but our job is not to lead it. That's not our purpose. How we work with others is what we're here to do. So it's the trade-offs. It's that decision-making function which has to sit somewhere, and whether we like it or not, that does sit primarily with execs. George, on mute.
So thank you. I've just noticed that the hours kind of flown by, and we're almost at time. So maybe I'll ask Jag and Rachel just to share some thoughts about that point, and then also just offer a closing reflection as well, as we finish off. So Jag, one thought about that point, and then closing reflection.
Pretty much with what Richard said, I think execs, somebody has to make the decisions because they can't be made in a vacuum. But I think the execs need the executive, but not just the execs, to be fair, the board. So I wouldn't just leave it with the exec, the non-execs as well, the chairs. They need to be properly listening to what staff and patients are asking for, and what the communities they serve feel they need. That said, there are some well-published, albeit somewhat older, data now on what you've described there, or the commentators describe as a democratic process, which is there are some failings in democracy in that sometimes we don't get that right. And there's a very famous set of examples out of Oregon where, what services do you want to carry on with and what services do you want to leave behind? Well, things like pediatric intensive care got dropped off the list because the people that are doing the voting didn't ever encounter it. And so there's got to be something higher level that to make sure that we're checking on who gets left behind in decisions that maybe come out of a democratic process. But fundamentally, I still think the execs need to listen to what staff and patients are what their direction of travel is. In terms of a final parting thought, I'll return to where I think I mentioned earlier on. Make the process of doing strategy enjoyable and inclusive. I think it'll breathe life into it, and it'll carry on evolving, rather as Rachel was referring to earlier as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jag. And Rachel, we'll come to you in just a moment. Before we do, what I'm going to do is just launch a very quick final set of questions. Just for you, you'll be able to ask if you want to sign up to our newsletter, fill out a guide, and just offer a reflection evaluation about this. We do put on webinars like this from time to time, and it'd be lovely to hear your thoughts around how we can make them better. If you'd like to have a coffee, continue this fab conversation, please be in touch. We'd love to find ways to help you and collaborate, and it's lovely to see some old faces and new ones on this. So I will hand over to Rachel for the final word and launch that poll for you all now. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks. So going back to that question, I mean, clearly we're never going to get strategy right if we haven't really intensively listened to what our staff need, what our patient needs, but also kind of more widely in terms of what the local communities need, what our kind of equalities data tell us, and what's out there. We really need to understand that. But then it is for the executive and the board to make some tough choices, but also to understand the opportunities that are out there. That whole thing about how partnership working could help, how bringing in voluntary sector might be able to help, how redistributing finances across the system might help, all those sorts of things. I think that's the sort of creativity we should be expecting from our leaders. I would leave by saying I don't think strategy has ever been more important than it is now. It has never been more changing in the NHS. Things are changing at such pace. Our responsibility as people who are involved in that whole process, I think, is to help give people something to hold on to so that they can really understand the difference that they can make on a day-to-day basis and they don't feel overwhelmed by the change. So I think there's a real responsibility in it that we can create a space where people are able to understand what's going on around them and how they can keep cracking on with making the biggest difference for patients and improving people's lives. And so I do think it can create a safe space. So if you are involved in doing it, I would say, stay strong. You're doing some really good things and you are on the side of the angels.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, a lovely closing comment. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you so much, Dag and Rich. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you all for joining. Please do continue the conversation over coffee. We really would love to keep in touch and keep this live. Yeah, finally, just to wish you a lovely afternoon. Thank you again. If you're into the football, enjoy the football. Hope it's coming home. If you're not into football, just enjoy the 2 hours of blissful calm that you'll get. So thank you very much, everyone. We'll leave it there. Really appreciate you joining. Take care, everyone. Cheers.
All the best,
Bye.
Rich.
Thank you.